The stone walls of the village church bore the weight of centuries, their cold surfaces absorbing the whispered prayers and whispered hopes of generations long past. Inside, the flickering candlelight danced with shadows, casting a soft glow on the worn altar and the simple wooden pews. Father Benoît sat quietly near the front, his thin grey hair catching the light as he folded his hands in silent contemplation. The heavy scent of beeswax and ancient incense lingered in the air, mingling with the faint chill that seeped from the stone beneath the floorboards. Aveline entered the sanctuary with measured steps, her soot-streaked face drawn and wary but resolute. The forge's heat still clung faintly to her skin, a reminder of the unyielding fire that fueled her spirit. Her dark hair was tied back tightly, her piercing grey eyes reflecting the flickering flames as she approached the priest. "Father," she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of countless burdens, "I find myself torn between hope and despair. The men and women look to me as their leader, yet I fear I may falter under the weight of their trust." Father Benoît regarded her with a profound kindness, the lines etched across his weathered face softening as he gestured to the pew beside him. "Sit with me, Aveline. You carry the hopes of many, yes, but you are not alone in this burden. The path you walk is fraught with peril, yet it is also illuminated by the light of justice and faith." She sank onto the wooden bench, the rough grain pressing into her palms. The nobles tighten their grip. The baron's men grow bolder, more ruthless. Each day brings new losses, and I fear the cost will be too great. Father Benoît nodded slowly. Sacrifice is the price of change, but it must be measured and borne with conviction. Remember, the strength of steel comes not only from fire but from the hands that shape it. You are the hand that forges a new future. Outside the church, night had fallen, and the village was cloaked in darkness. Father Benoît moved quietly through the narrow streets, making his way to a secluded spot near the edge of the village where Jacques waited in the shadows. The soldier's lean figure was barely visible beneath his cloak, his keen eyes scanning the moonlit landscape. The priest extended a small, folded parchment toward Jacques. "This was slipped to me by a sympathetic servant within the baron's household. It details troop movements and plans for the coming days." Jacques accepted the parchment with a nod, the weight of the information pressing upon him as heavily as any weapon. "This will give us the edge we need," he said in a low voice. "The rebels must be ready." Father Benoît placed a reassuring hand on Jacques' shoulder. "Faith and strategy must walk hand in hand if we are to prevail." Back inside the church, Aveline knelt before the altar, her hands clasped tightly as she sought guidance from the quiet sanctuary. The gentle light filtered through stained glass, painting her face with hues of crimson and gold. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft rustle of her breath and the distant murmurs of the village night. Her thoughts drifted to the faces of those who had trusted her, the blacksmith apprentices, the farmers turned fighters, the women rallying with fierce hope. Each was a spark in the growing flame of rebellion, and she was the anvil upon which their destiny was to be forged. The following morning, Father Benoît addressed a gathering of villagers inside the church nave. His voice, though aged, carried a steady authority that resonated with the crowd. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "we stand at a crossroads where faith and courage must unite. The path before us is fraught with hardship, but our cause is just. We fight not only for ourselves, but for the generations yet unborn. Let the flame of hope burn bright within your hearts." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, eyes shining with renewed determination. The priest's words wove a tapestry of spiritual strength and communal resolve, binding the rebels together in a fragile yet unbreakable bond. Aveline watched from the shadows, the weight of her crown invisible but no less real. The counsel she received from Father Benoît was a balm to her weary soul, and a beacon guiding her through the gathering storm. With each day, the rebellion grew not only in number but in spirit, tempered by faith and fired by the unyielding will of those who dared to dream of freedom. As the sun rose over the village, casting sharp light on the thatched roofs and muddy streets, Aveline knew the true battle was yet to come. But in the quiet strength of the priest's counsel, she found the courage to face it head-on, ready to forge a future from the fires of rebellion and the enduring hope of justice. The forge awaited her hands once more, but the weight of the crown, though unseen, pressed heavier than ever. Yet beneath that weight, a fierce determination burned brighter, fueled by the whispers of faith and the promise of a new dawn. And so, with Father Benot's guidance echoing in her heart, Aveline stepped forward into the uncertain light of the coming days, the blacksmith queen in the making. Her story still unfolding like the first sparks from the anvil. The forge was alive with the steady rhythm of hammer striking steel, each clang sending a pulse through the chilled air of the workshop. The warm glow of the fire cast flickering shadows on the soot-streaked walls, illuminating the faces of those gathered around the anvil. At the center stood Aveline, her dark hair tied back tightly, eyes sharp and unyielding as the blade she shaped beneath her skilled hands. Beside her, Marcel, the eager apprentice, gripped the hammer with youthful determination, sweat mingling with the grime on his face as he mirrored her movements with careful focus. "Strike here," Aveline instructed, her voice steady but patient. "Feel the metal. It has a will of its own. You must listen, or it will break beneath your hand." Marcel nodded, swallowing his nerves. The task was daunting, yet he felt a fierce pride kindling inside him, fed by the weight of the moment. This was more than mere blacksmithing, it was the forging of hope itself. Each weapon shaped in this humble workshop carried the dreams and defiance of those who refused to bow beneath the yoke of the nobility. Outside the forge, Jacques paced with practiced vigilance, inspecting the weapons lined up on the rough wooden tables. His weathered face betrayed the strain of countless battles, but his eyes held a spark of renewed courage as he passed judgment on their craftsmanship. Nearby, Aliz's voice rose in passionate cadence, rallying a growing crowd of villagers. Her fiery speeches had become the heartbeat of the rebellion, stirring the hearts of the wary and the oppressed alike. Inside, Aveline paused, wiping the sweat from her brow. She looked down at the blade resting on the anvil, its surface still hot and glowing faintly. Turning to Marcel, she spoke softly, her grey eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "These weapons we forge," she said, "are not just tools of war. They are symbols of our struggle, our unity, and our promise to each other. When you hold this blade, remember who it protects and why it exists." Marcel's gaze dropped to the steel, a solemn understanding settling over him. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, heavier than any hammer he had lifted. Yet beneath that burden lay a fierce determination to wield this power with honor. The hours stretched on as the apprentices worked late into the night, the clang of hammers and the roar of the fire forging not just weapons, but a bond between mentor and student, between past and future. The forge was a sanctuary, a beacon in the darkness, where the rebellion spirit was tempered and strengthened. Aveline moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement, her presence a steady flame in the uncertain times. She knew that the road ahead would be perilous, that the battles to come would test every ounce of their resolve. But here, in this humble workshop, something vital was taking shape, a legacy of resistance carried forward by hands eager to fight not just for survival, but for a new dawn. As the night deepened, the group gathered around the anvil once more, the freshly forged weapons resting at their feet like silent promises. Outside, the village settled into a restless quiet, the distant sounds of night creatures mingling with the faint murmur of whispered plans and guarded hopes. Aveline's eyes scanned the faces around her, young, old, battle-worn, and hopeful. She saw in them the reflection of her own journey, the transformation from a blacksmith's daughter to a leader of a people yearning for freedom. The crown she would someday wear was still far away, but tonight the seeds of that future were sown in steel and spirit. "Rest now," she said, voice soft but resolute. "Tomorrow we forge ahead together." And with that, the forge's fire burned on, a steadfast light in the gathering darkness, carrying the promise of weapons forged not just from metal, but from the unbreakable will of a people united. The heavy velvet curtains muffled the sounds of the bustling noble court beyond, creating a sanctuary of shadows in the secluded chamber. Lady Margaret stood by a small wooden table, her fingers deftly unfolding a slender parchment sealed with crimson wax. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the walls, illuminating her sharp hazel eyes that flickered with a mixture of fear and resolve. She glanced over her shoulder, the faint clatter of distant footsteps prompting her to lower her voice to a whisper. "The Baron's plans grow darker by the day," she murmured, passing the letter to a servant cloaked in the folds of a dark hood. "We must move swiftly." The servant nodded silently, slipping away into the labyrinthine corridors, the soft rustle of fabric the only trace of their passage. Alone again, Margaret's gaze hardened, each secret act of defiance chipped away at the gilded cage she inhabited. But the risk was immense. Discovery would mean disgrace at best, death at worst. She recalled the banquet earlier that evening. The grand hall had been ablaze with candlelight, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats and rich wine. Lords and ladies draped in sumptuous silks and velvets laughed and whispered beneath glittering chandeliers. Baron de Clermont sat at the head of the table, his scarred face set in a grim mask of authority. His cold blue eyes swept the room as he pronounced his intent to crush the rebellion with unrelenting force. Margaret had smiled politely, nodding in agreement, all the while her mind raced with subtle plans to undermine his resolve. Every word she spoke was measured, every gesture controlled. The delicate dance of court intrigue was a deadly game she had learned well, but tonight the stakes felt higher than ever. Later, under the cover of darkness, she slipped away to the manor's hidden garden. The night air was cool and fragrant with blooming jasmine, a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart. Kneeling behind a cluster of rose bushes, she pulled from her cloak a folded letter, its contents a dangerous secret that could unravel the rebel cause if intercepted. With trembling hands, she struck a match, the small flame sputtering to life. She pressed it to the edge of the parchment, watching as the paper curled and blackened, the scent of burning ink rising in the stillness. The fire's glow reflected in her eyes, fierce and unyielding. For their safety, she whispered to the night, her voice barely audible. And for hope. In the days that followed, Margaret's covert efforts bore fruit. She intercepted messages, delayed shipments of weapons, and subtly questioned loyal knights to sow seeds of doubt. Each small victory emboldened the rebels, though the shadow of discovery loomed ever closer. One evening, in a narrow corridor hidden from prying eyes, Margaret met with Aveline. The blacksmith queen's soot-streaked face was a stark contrast to the nobler woman's refined appearance, yet their shared resolve bridged worlds. "Your courage is a beacon," Aveline said quietly, gripping Margaret's hands. "Without you, many of these victories would be impossible." Margaret's smile was tinged with sadness. "I walk a dangerous path," she confessed. "But if the old order must fall, then I will help see it done no matter the cost." Their alliance was fragile, built on whispered promises and shared secrets, yet it symbolized a new possibility. That change might come not only through rebellion, but also through the cracks within the old guard. Jax awoke with a start, the cold dampness of the night air biting at his skin beneath the threadbare blanket. The camp was silent except for the distant hoot of an owl and the crackling of a dying fire. Yet in his mind, the clamor of war thundered relentlessly, the clash of steel, the cries of men caught in battle, the suffocating smoke that choked his lungs. His breath came in ragged gasps, beads of sweat matted his hair against his forehead. He pressed his hand to his chest, willing his heart to slow its frantic rhythm. Around him the world was still, but within him the ghosts of distant conflicts stirred with cruel persistence. For years Jax had fought in faraway wars, battles that left scars deeper than any wound of flesh. He had learned how to track enemies through dense forests, how to shoot an arrow with deadly precision, and how to survive when all hope seemed lost. Yet the true fight was not against the enemy's blade, but against the memories that haunted his nights and clouded his days. The faces of fallen comrades flickered like shadows at the edge of his vision, their whispered voices a constant reminder of the cost of violence. Today the war was different. This was not a distant kingdom's battle, but a struggle for the very soul of his homeland. Beside him stood Aveline, the blacksmith queen, whose fiery spirit and unyielding resolve had rekindled the hope of their people. Jax admired her strength, but he also carried his doubts silently, fearing that the weight of command might crush her as it had nearly crushed him. In the dim light of the forge, the orange glow of the fire cast flickering shadows on the stone walls. Jax found himself there, drawn to the familiar scent of burning coal and molten metal. Aveline was already at work, hammering a glowing blade with rhythmic strikes that sang through the night. Her face was streaked with soot, eyes sharp and focused, but when she noticed Jax, a gentle smile softened her features. "You reawake early," she said softly, wiping sweat from her brow. Jax nodded, his voice hoarse. "The memories came again. I could not find rest." She laid down her hammer and approached, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "You carry more than arrows and tactics, friend. But you are not alone." Her words were a balm, yet the ache remained. Jax looked away, ashamed of the vulnerability he rarely showed. "I fear my past may weaken us. The enemy is not only without but within me." Aveline's eyes held fierce understanding. "Your strength is not the absence of pain, but the courage to face it. We all have wounds. Together, we heal." Later that morning, the rebel council gathered in the village hall, the air thick with smoke and the murmur of anxious voices. Plans were drawn and redrawn on crude maps, and strategies debated with fervor. Jax stood among the leaders, his gaze flickering nervously as he prepared to speak. When his turn came, he cleared his throat, the weight of past failures pressing down. "We must strike before the nobles can reinforce their garrisons," he said, voice steady but edged with tension. "A swift attack in the eastern woods will catch them unprepared." A murmur of assent rippled through the room, but Jax saw doubt shadow some faces. He pressed on, determined to prove his worth despite the turmoil within. "We cannot afford hesitation. Our people depend on us." After the meeting, Father Benoti found Jax alone by the chapel's worn wooden doors. The priest's kindly eyes softened as he beckoned Jax inside. The chapel was dim, lit only by the flicker of candles that cast long shadows on the stone walls. The scent of incense mingled with the cool air, creating a space of quiet refuge. Father Benot's voice was gentle as he spoke of faith and forgiveness, of the strength found in confession and acceptance. "You carry heavy burdens, Jax," the priest said, placing a reassuring hand over his. "But even the strongest warrior needs rest for his spirit. You are part of a greater cause, and your courage inspires others more than you know." Jax felt tears prick at his eyes, a release long denied. He nodded slowly, the priest's words planting a seed of hope amid the darkness. The days that followed tested Jax, he knew. Training drills, scouting missions, and the relentless pace of rebellion left little room for respite. Yet with each challenge, he found his resolve growing stronger, bolstered by the loyalty of comrades and the unwavering leadership of Aveline. One evening, as twilight deepened over the village, Jack stood watching the horizon. The sky blazed with hues of purple and gold, the promise of dawn mingling with the shadows of night. He tightened his grip on his bow, a symbol of both his skill and his commitment. In that moment, Jax understood that the true battle was not only against the nobles, but against the fears that threatened to undo them from within. With courage born of pain and hope, he would stand beside Aveline, ready to face whatever storms lay ahead. As the stars began to pierce the velvet sky, the rebel camp settled into uneasy rest. But for Jax, the echoes of war would continue to whisper, a constant reminder of the sacrifices demanded by the fight for freedom. Yet with each breath, he chose to carry those echoes not as chains, but as the forging fires of his own strength. Bound to the cause and the queen who had become his beacon, the night deepened, and the forge's flames burned bright symbols of endurance, resilience, and the unyielding spirit of those who dared to dream of a new dawn. The village square was alive with murmurs and anticipation as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across rough timber and cobblestones. Elise, her fiery red hair glowing like embers in the fading light, climbed atop the makeshift platform, a sturdy wooden crate that had seen better days but served its purpose well. Her bright green eyes scanned the growing crowd of women and curious onlookers, their faces etched with weariness from years of toil and oppression, but now lit with something sharper, hope. "We have fought beside men in silence for too long," Elise began, her voice ringing clear and unwavering despite the crackling of the distant forge fires. "Our hands have borne the weight of this rebellion, just as surely as any sword or spear. Yet still, our voices are stifled, our roles dismissed. That must change." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, some nodding in fierce agreement, others hesitant but intrigued. Elise's words carried the weight of truth, and many felt the stirring of a new purpose within them. The rebellion was no longer just a fight for land or freedom from taxes. It was becoming a fight for dignity, equality, and recognition. Back at the forge, the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil slowed as Aveline paused, wiping sweat and soot from her brow. She listened intently as Elise's message was relayed by a returning messenger. The glow from the molten metal pool cast flickering shadows over Aveline's determined face. She thought of the women in her village, the mothers, sisters, and daughters who had quietly borne the harshest burdens of the noble's cruelty. Their strength was undeniable, but the path to equality would be steep and fraught with resistance. Later that evening, the rebel council convened within the dimly lit hall of the village's communal building. The air was thick with tension as Elise presented her proposals for formal recognition of women's rights within the movement, the right to fight, to hold leadership positions, and to share in the spoils of victory. Some male leaders, their brows furrowed and voices raised, challenged her ideas, clinging to tradition and fearing division. Jax, ever the pragmatist but loyal to both Aveline and the cause, stood calmly to her side. "Without unity, this rebellion is doomed," Jax said, his voice steady but firm. "But unity does not mean silence. We must listen and adapt. The strength of our cause lies in its people, women and men alike." His words helped temper the heated debate, planting a seed of cautious optimism. The council agreed to a trial period for women's active participation in combat and leadership roles, a fragile but hopeful compromise. Under the cloak of darkness, away from prying eyes, Elise gathered a small group of women at the edge of the village. The moon hung high and cold, their breaths rising in visible puffs as they practiced maneuvers and weapon handling. Their faces were fierce, illuminated by the flicker of torchlight, each strike and parry a defiant assertion of their place in the rebellion's future. Elise watched them with pride and fierce determination, knowing the road ahead would be laden with hardship and sacrifice. Yet, in that moment, the whisper of change was no longer a secret. It was a roaring flame, fanned by courage and the unyielding desire for justice. As the night deepened, Elise's thoughts drifted to Aveline, the blacksmith queen, whose own journey embodied the forging of a new order. Together, they would shape a rebellion not only of steel and battle, but of hearts and minds, where every voice mattered. And yet, beneath the hope, the question lingered: could the rebellion hold together as it expanded its vision? Could the old wounds of tradition heal fast enough to face the coming storm? The answers remained uncertain. But the women's voice had been raised clear, defiant, and impossible to ignore. The forge fires burned late into the night, their steady glow a reminder that even in darkness, the promise of dawn awaited. The forge's heat wrapped around Aveline like a familiar cloak, the roaring flames casting flickering shadows that danced across the soot-streaked walls. The rhythmic clang of hammer against steel filled the cramped workshop, a sound as primal and vital as the heartbeat of the rebellion itself. She bent over the anvil, sweat mingling with grime on her brow, eyes sharp and unyielding as she shaped the molten metal with exacting blows. Around her, the remnants of shattered weapons lay scattered rusted swords, battered arrowheads, and broken blades taken from fallen comrades and foes alike. Each piece carried the weight of loss, sacrifice, and unyielding will. Tonight, Aveline was not crafting weapons for battle, but forging a crown of steel that would bind the scattered rebels into a singular force. This crown was no mere ornament. It was the embodiment of their struggle, the hard-won hope that the fires of rebellion might give birth to a new order. She struck the metal with fierce determination, melding the fragments into a circle that gleamed with the promise of justice. The sharp edges were softened by careful hammering, yet the strength of the steel remained unbroken, much like the spirit of the people it represented. Jack stood nearby, watching with a steady gaze. His lean figure was marked by years of hardship and battle, but tonight his eyes held a rare softness, a reverence for the moment unfolding before him. Elise paced quietly at the edge of the forge's glow, her red hair catching the light as she clenched her fists, the fire in her green eyes mirroring the flames. Marcel, the eager apprentice, observed from a respectful distance, his youthful face alight with wonder and pride at the craft he aspired to master. "Each strike must carry more than force," Aveline murmured, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on her limbs. "It must carry our will, our unity. This crown will not just sit upon a head. It will rest upon the hopes of every man, woman, and child who dares to dream of freedom." Jack stepped forward, nodding. "It will remind us why we fight and who we fight for." Elise's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of passion. A symbol to rally behind when the night grows darkest. Night deepened outside, but inside the forge the crown began to take shape. The metal shimmered with the hues of fire and shadow, intricate yet stark, a perfect marriage of form and function. Aveline lifted the nearly finished piece, testing its weight, feeling the cold strength that would soon warm to the blood of a new era. The rebels gathered as word spread of the crown's creation. They approached the forge under a sky heavy with stars, their faces illuminated by flickering torches and the fading glow of the forge's embers. There was a palpable hush, a reverence born of exhaustion and hope. Aveline stepped forward, the crown heavy in her hands, the weight of leadership pressing down upon her as tangibly as the steel itself. With deliberate care, she placed the crown upon her dark hair, the cold metal contrasting with the heat of her skin. The assembled rebels stared, a mixture of awe and resolve shining in their eyes. The crown was no longer just steel. It was a beacon, a promise that their fight was not in vain. Tonight Aveline's voice rang clear and strong. "We do not just stand against tyranny. We forge a future where our children will know justice, where our lives are not weighed down by fear and oppression. This crown is ours, not a symbol of power over others, but a reminder of the strength we hold together." A cheer rose, swelling into a roar that echoed through the valley, carried on the cold night air. The rebellion had found its emblem, and with it, a renewed fire burned in every heart present. Yet beneath the triumph lay the unspoken truth: the crown was heavy, and the road ahead would demand every ounce of courage and sacrifice they could muster. As the night wore on, Aveline remained at the forge, her hands steady as she made final adjustments to the crown. The flickering flames cast long shadows on her face, a portrait of fierce determination tempered by the weight of what she must become. The steel was no longer just metal. It was a testament to the fallen, the living, and the future yet unwritten. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Aveline knew the rebellion had entered a new and uncharted chapter, one where the crown of steel would lead them forward into the uncertain dawn.